The day had started like any other. The sun was warm. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the streets were crowded with people heading home after work. Among them was a young woman named Clara. She was driving home after finishing her afternoon shift at the small clinic where she worked as a nurse. Her car was old and a little noisy, but she didn't mind. It got her where she needed to go. All she could think about was going home, changing into something comfortable and eating whatever leftovers were in her fridge. It had been a long day, and she was tired in that quiet way that made her want silence more than sleep. The radio played softly as she stopped at a red light. She tapped her fingers on the steering wheel, staring at the changing colors of the sky. It was one of those calm moments, until she noticed something strange. A few cars ahead, smoke was rising. At first she thought it was just an overheated engine, but the smoke turned black within seconds. Then came the sound, the unmistakable pop of a small explosion. People on the sidewalk turned their heads, some started to shout and others pulled out their phones. Clara's eyes widened. A dark SUV had crashed into a divider at the side of the road. The front end was crumpled, and flames were starting to crawl up the hood. For a moment she froze. Her mind couldn't quite catch up with what her eyes were seeing. Then she heard it, a child's scream. Without thinking, she turned off her car, threw the door open, and ran. She could feel the heat even from several meters away. The crowd around the crash stood in shock, shouting, filming, or arguing about what to do. Clara didn't stop to talk. Her heart pounded as she pushed past them and ran straight toward the burning vehicle. The closer she got, the louder the crackling of the fire grew. She could see through the smoke now. There was a small child strapped into a car seat in the back, crying and struggling. The flames were spreading fast. "Someone call for help," she yelled, coughing as the smoke stung her eyes. A few people shouted back that they had already called emergency services, but no one dared to get closer. Clara could feel the heat biting at her skin. The car door was jammed shut. She grabbed the handle and pulled with all her strength, but it didn't move. She looked around quickly and saw a broken piece of metal on the ground, maybe part of another car's bumper. She picked it up and swung it against the window. The first hit cracked the glass, the second shattered it. The child's cries grew louder. Clara reached inside, careful not to cut herself on the shards. Her hands trembled as she unbuckled the seat straps, but they were twisted and tight. Her heart raced faster with every second. The fire had reached the front seat now, and smoke filled the inside of the car. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, even though she was coughing. "You're going to be okay." Her fingers finally found the buckle and pressed it free. The moment the strap loosened, she pulled the child out and covered their face with her jacket. The little one clung to her neck, still crying. Clara turned away from the car and ran, stumbling on the uneven road. A few steps later, a sharp sound burst behind her. Another small explosion. The heat hit her back like a wave. She ducked instinctively, wrapping her arms tightly around the child. A second later, she was surrounded by people rushing forward. Someone took off their jacket to help smother sparks on her sleeve. Others were clapping, shouting, some just staring in disbelief. She didn't care about any of it. She just wanted to make sure the child was breathing. Kneeling on the pavement, she gently patted the small back, whispering soft words. The little boy was crying but alive, his cheeks flushed and streaked with soot. Relief flooded her chest so strongly she felt dizzy. The sirens grew louder in the distance. Fire trucks and an ambulance were pushing through traffic. The police began shouting for people to move back. Clara handed the boy to one of the paramedics, explaining quickly what had happened. Her voice shook and her throat burned from the smoke. "Ma'am, you need to get checked too," one of the medics said. She shook her head. "I'm fine. Please, just make sure he's okay." Her hands were trembling, covered in tiny scratches and bits of glass. A paramedic insisted on leading her to the ambulance anyway, checking her pulse and oxygen levels. She didn't argue this time. Sitting on the step of the ambulance, she finally let herself breathe. The crowd was still there, recording, talking, cheering. A few people came up to her asking her name, but she just smiled weakly and said she didn't want any attention. Within minutes, the fire was put out, and all that was left of the SUV was a blackened shell. It looked unreal, like a nightmare made of smoke and metal. Clara couldn't stop thinking about how close it had been, maybe seconds away from ending differently. As she sat there, a police officer came up to her, asking for her statement. She told him everything simply, how she saw the smoke, heard the cry, broke the window, and pulled the child out. He nodded, scribbling notes, then looked at her with genuine admiration. "You saved that kid's life," he said quietly. Clara just shook her head. Anyone would have done the same. But deep down she wasn't sure that was true. She had seen the crowd. People were scared, not cruel, just frozen by fear. Maybe she had only moved because she didn't have time to think. When the ambulance left with the boy, Clara stood at the edge of the road, watching it disappear. The police said they'd contact her if they needed more information. She nodded, still feeling dazed, and slowly walked back to her car. Her jacket was ruined, her hands stung, and her face was streaked with ash. Yet she felt strangely calm. Empty, but calm. By the time she reached home, night had fallen. She washed her face and hands carefully, wincing when the soap touched her cuts. Then she sat on the couch, staring at nothing. The sound of the explosion replayed in her head again and again. She wondered about the boy, if he was okay, if he had family nearby, if he'd be scared of cars now. The next morning, she woke up to dozens of messages. Her neighbor had called saying the news was showing footage of the rescue. Someone had filmed her running to the car, breaking the window, pulling out the child. The video was everywhere. Clara's phone buzzed constantly. Reporters wanted interviews, strangers sent messages thanking her, and some people even called her a hero. She didn't know how to react. She didn't feel like a hero. She had acted on instinct, not courage. She turned off her phone and went to work, hoping for a normal day. But it was anything but normal. Her co-workers crowded around her the moment she entered. Some hugged her. Others scolded her gently for risking her life. The clinic manager pulled her aside and said he was proud of her but worried too. During lunch, she sat alone in the staff room, finally opening one of the news clips. Her heart raced as she saw herself on the screen, running, coughing, shielding the boy. The caption below read, "Unknown woman risks life to save toddler from burning car. Unknown woman." She almost smiled at that. She preferred it that way. Later that afternoon, as she stepped outside, a black car pulled up in front of the clinic. A tall man in a suit got out and looked around until his eyes found hers. His expression was hard to read, a mix of exhaustion and something deeper, something heavy. "Are you Clara?" he asked. She nodded slowly. He exhaled and took a few steps closer. "You saved my son." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. The world around her seemed to fade into silence. "He's safe," the man continued, his voice cracking slightly. "Because of you." Clara opened her mouth, but no words came out. She simply nodded again, feeling that strange calm return. The man's eyes glistened as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, silver cross that had belonged to his child, charred. Around the edges, "He wouldn't be here without you," he whispered. Clara looked at the small charm, then back at him. There was nothing grand or dramatic in her voice when she finally spoke. "I'm just glad he's okay," she said softly. He wanted to say more, but words failed him. He simply nodded, placed a hand over his chest in silent gratitude, and stepped back into the car. As it drove away, Clara stood there for a long time, feeling the breeze brush past her hair. It wasn't until she got home that evening that she realized her hands had stopped shaking. She sat by the window, watching the sun sink behind the city. The world outside seemed ordinary again, but she knew something inside her had changed. She had seen how fragile everything was, how 1 second could separate life from loss. And though she didn't yet know it, that single moment, the one where she ran toward the fire, would soon connect her life to that man's in ways she never could have imagined. The next few days passed in a blur for Clara. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. At the grocery store, at the clinic, even on the bus stop billboard. Her face appeared next to words she didn't feel belonged to her. The brave nurse who saved a child. Guardian angel of the highway. The headlines made her uncomfortable. She didn't want fame. She didn't even want attention. All she had wanted was to make sure that child lived. Still, no matter how much she tried to hide from the noise, the story kept growing. News anchors repeated it over and over, and people online argued about it. Some calling her a hero, others saying anyone in her place would have done the same. Clara didn't read the comments. She didn't need strangers to tell her what she already knew. She hadn't been brave. She had been scared, so scared that she didn't even think. She had just moved. Her co-workers tried to lighten the mood at the clinic. They teased her gently, called her Superwoman, and brought her flowers. The manager told her the city council wanted to recognize her at a public ceremony, but Clara politely declined. The idea of standing in front of cameras again made her stomach twist. She wanted her life to return to normal, but somehow it wouldn't. The world had seen her, and she couldn't disappear back into the quiet like before. One evening, just as she was locking up the clinic, she noticed a black car parked across the street. For a moment she thought she was imagining it, until the door opened and the same man she had met days ago stepped out. The father of the boy she had saved. He looked different this time, calmer, dressed in a simple dark coat, not the sharp suit from before. His face still carried the same heavy expression, though. When his eyes met hers, there was a quiet gratitude in them that words couldn't describe. He approached her slowly, almost carefully. "I hope you don't mind me coming here again," he said softly. "I didn't know how else to reach you." Clara shook her head. "It's fine," she said. "How's your son?" The man's lips curved into a small smile. "He's recovering well. Just a few bruises and some nightmares. The doctors say he'll be fine." "That's good," she said, meaning it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of cars passing filled the silence. Then the man reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, "not just with words. You saved my entire world that day." Clara hesitated, already knowing what he meant. She stepped back slightly and shook her head. "Please don't," she said quietly. "I didn't do it for money. I don't want anything." His eyebrows furrowed, not in offense, but confusion. "I understand," he said after a pause. "But it doesn't feel right. I owe you more than I can ever give." "You don't owe me anything," she replied firmly. "Your son is safe. That's enough." The man looked at her for a long moment, then sighed and put the envelope away. "All right," he said. "But can I at least invite you for coffee? Just to say thank you?" Clara hesitated again. Something in his tone was gentle. Not pushy, not dramatic, just sincere. After a moment, she nodded. "Okay," she said. They walked to a small cafe nearby. It was quiet, with only a few people reading newspapers or sipping tea. They sat near the window, and for the first few minutes the conversation felt awkward. But slowly words began to come easier. He told her his name was Daniel. He owned a large company that dealt with construction and logistics, the kind of business Clara didn't understand much about. He explained that on the day of the accident he had been in a meeting across town. His driver had taken his son home early because the boy wasn't feeling well. Then everything went wrong in seconds. "I've built everything from scratch," Daniel said quietly, staring into his coffee. "Money, property, influence, all of it. But when I saw my son in that ambulance, I realized none of it mattered. I would have given it all away if someone had told me it would save him." Clara listened silently. She could hear the truth in his voice. There was a kind of sorrow behind his calmness, the kind that came from realizing how fragile everything really was. "You were brave," he said after a pause. "I was terrified," Clara replied honestly. "I just moved before I thought," he smiled faintly. "That's what courage really is." They talked for almost an hour, about the accident, about life, about how one moment can change everything. By the time they left the cafe, the sky had darkened and the streets glowed under the streetlights. Before they parted ways, Daniel said something that stayed with her. "I want to do something meaningful with this second chance," he said. "Because of you, I have my son. I can't waste that gift." Clara didn't know what he meant at the time. She just smiled politely and told him to take care of the boy. Then they went their separate ways. A few days later, Clara received a letter. It was from Daniel's company, inviting her to an event at their headquarters. She almost threw it away, assuming it was another attempt at public attention, but the handwritten note at the bottom caught her eye. "Please come. It's important." Her curiosity got the better of her, so she agreed. When she arrived, she was greeted by a few assistants who led her into a large conference hall. Cameras were set up, but this time the air felt different. It wasn't a press event. It was something more personal. Daniel was on stage, standing behind a podium, speaking to a small group of people. When he saw Clara, he smiled and gestured for her to come closer. "Everyone," he began. "This is the woman who reminded me what truly matters." Clara felt her face flush as everyone turned to look at her. Daniel continued, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I've spent my life building things in buildings, roads, companies. But none of that compares to what she built with a single act. Hope. She didn't just save my son's life. She saved my heart. He paused, then took a breath. That's why today I'm proud to announce the creation of the Clara Foundation, a program dedicated to training people in emergency response and first aid. Because sometimes one person's quick action can change everything. The room filled with applause. Clara stood frozen, overwhelmed. She hadn't expected this, not even close. After the event, Daniel approached her again. "I hope you're not upset," he said with a small smile. "I wanted to honor what you did in a way that lasts." Clara looked around at the banners, the volunteers signing up, the enthusiasm in the air. Her heart swelled with a strange mix of disbelief and gratitude. "I don't even know what to say," she whispered. "Just say you'll help me," Daniel said. "I don't know how to start something like this without you." She hesitated. The thought of being involved in something so big felt daunting. But then she remembered the moment she held that crying child in her arms, the fear, the relief, and she realized she didn't want that experience to be just a memory. "I'll help," she said finally. "But not as a hero, just as a teacher." "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say," Daniel replied with a smile. From that day on, Clara's life began to shift in quiet but meaningful ways. She spent her free time helping to design training sessions for everyday people. How to stay calm in emergencies, how to act fast when every second counts. Local schools and hospitals joined the program, and soon it spread to other cities. She wasn't used to speaking in front of groups, but Daniel encouraged her gently. "They'll listen to you," he'd tell her, "because you've lived it," and he was right. When Clara told her story, people didn't just listen, they felt it. She spoke simply, never trying to sound grand. She told them how scared she had been, how small she had felt, how easy it was to freeze when things went wrong. But she also told them that sometimes doing something, anything, can mean the difference between life and loss. Months passed, and the foundation grew beyond what either of them expected. Newspapers wrote about it again, but this time Clara didn't hide. She understood now that the story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who wanted to help. Through it all, she and Daniel stayed in touch, not as business partners or public figures, but as friends who shared something deep and unspoken. He often brought his son to the training sessions. The little boy always ran to Clara, hugging her tightly before running off to play. One afternoon, as they watched him from a distance, Daniel said quietly, "You know, he talks about you all the time. He says you're the lady who made the fire go away." Clara laughed softly. "That's a nice way to put it." "It is," Daniel said, smiling. "And maybe it's true. You didn't just save him, you changed me too. I used to think power came from control. Now I know it comes from compassion." Clara didn't know how to respond. She just looked at the boy, laughing freely in the sunlight, and felt something warm settle in her chest. As the months turned into a year, the foundation continued to grow, and so did Clara's confidence. She had started as an ordinary nurse with an ordinary life. But fate, or maybe just one brave decision, had pulled her into something extraordinary. Sometimes at night, she still thought about that burning car, about the sound of shattering glass and the heat against her skin. It no longer haunted her. It reminded her of how powerful a single moment could be, and though she never asked for recognition or reward, the greatest reward came quietly, in the form of a small child's laughter, a grateful father's smile, and the countless lives that might one day be saved because she chose to run toward the fire instead of away from it. The months that followed were unlike anything Clara had experienced before. The foundation that carried her name was growing faster than anyone expected. Every week, new people signed up for training sessions. Teachers, taxi drivers, shop owners, students, people from all walks of life came to learn what to do in an emergency. The news stations began to show stories of people who had saved others using the techniques they learned from the program. Clara watched those stories quietly, sometimes with tears in her eyes. She wasn't used to feeling proud of herself, but now and then she allowed that feeling to sit in her chest. It wasn't about being a hero anymore. It was about seeing something good continue to spread from one simple act. She worked closely with Daniel almost every week. He was still the same calm, serious man she'd met, but she was beginning to see another side of him. He laughed more easily now. Sometimes he brought his son, who had started to call her Aunt Clara, The boy was shy at first, but soon he would run into her arms the moment he saw her, his small hands clutching her tightly. Daniel always smiled when he saw them together. It was a soft, quiet smile that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. There was no doubt that he loved his son more than anything, and Clara could tell that the near loss of that little boy had changed him. He spent more time with his child now, less time buried in meetings and late-night calls. One morning, while preparing for a training event, Daniel asked Clara to join him in his office. He looked different that day, more thoughtful, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking about expanding the foundation to other cities," he said. "But I don't want to do it without you. You're the heart of it, Clara. People connect with you." Clara smiled shyly. "I don't know if I'm the heart of anything," she said. "I just help out where I can." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You're too humble. But that's what makes people listen to you." She looked around the room. The framed pictures of volunteers, the photographs of rescue workers who had been trained through the foundation. "It's strange," she said softly. "Sometimes I still feel like that tired nurse just driving home after work. It's hard to believe how much has changed." Daniel nodded. "Change can happen quietly," he said. "One moment at a time." After a pause, he added, "By the way, there's something I wanted to ask. My son's birthday is next week. We're having a small gathering. It would mean a lot if you came." Clara hesitated. "I don't know. I don't want to intrude." "You wouldn't be intruding," Daniel said quickly. "He's been talking about inviting you for weeks. He says he wants the lady who made the fire go away to be there." Clara laughed, touched by the boy's words. "All right," she said finally. "I'll come." When the day came, Clara found herself a little nervous. She wasn't used to being around wealthy people. Daniel's house was large and elegant, but it didn't feel cold. The laughter of children filled the air and colorful balloons decorated the garden. The boy ran to her the moment she arrived, his face lighting up. "You came," he shouted, hugging her legs. "I wouldn't miss it," she said, smiling. Daniel greeted her warmly and introduced her to a few close friends and relatives. Everyone seemed to know who she was, but they treated her with kindness rather than awe. It made her feel comfortable. She spent most of the afternoon playing games with the children and helping serve food. At one point, she noticed Daniel standing at a distance, watching her. When their eyes met, he looked away quickly, smiling to himself. As the sun began to set, the guests started leaving. Daniel's son had fallen asleep on the couch, his small hand still clutching one of his new toys. The house grew quiet, and Daniel and Clara found themselves sitting on the porch, watching the sky turn orange and pink. "Thank you for coming," Daniel said. "He's been the happiest I've seen him in a long time." Clara smiled softly. "He's a wonderful child. You're doing a great job with him." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I try, but some days I still feel like I'm making up for lost time. Before the accident, I thought success meant always being busy. I thought I was doing it for him. Now I realize he didn't need a father who built empires. He just needed a father who was there." Clara looked at him quietly, her heart warming at his honesty. "Sometimes it takes something hard to remind us what matters," she said. He nodded. "That day changed everything. I don't think I'll ever forget seeing you hold him, running out of that fire. I didn't know someone like you could exist in this world." Clara felt her cheeks flush. "Please don't say that," she said softly. "I'm just a person who did what anyone would have done." He turned toward her, his eyes calm but serious. "No, Clara, most people wouldn't have done what you did." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was quiet and deep, like the kind that comes when two people understand something without needing to explain it. Weeks passed after that evening, and the foundation continued to grow. Daniel and Clara worked side by side almost every day. They learned to trust each other in ways that went beyond work. She admired his dedication and his kindness, and he admired her humility and warmth. Sometimes they disagreed. Daniel always wanted things to move faster, to reach more cities, while Clara insisted on focusing on training quality and care. But even their disagreements felt balanced. They respected each other's point of view. One night after a long meeting, Daniel offered to drive her home. The city lights blurred past the car windows as they talked about small things: her patients, his son's school, the upcoming training in another town. When they reached her street, he parked the car but didn't turn off the engine right away. "Can I tell you something?" he said after a moment. "Of course," she replied. He looked at her, his voice low and steady. Before I met you, I thought power meant never needing help. But you showed me that real strength comes from caring, from risking something for someone else. Clara felt something stir in her chest. She didn't know what to say. All she could do was nod and smile faintly. After that night, something between them began to shift. It wasn't dramatic or obvious. It was slow, quiet, and natural, like the way light fades into dawn. They started sharing small moments, coffee after long meetings, quiet walks after training sessions, laughter over little mistakes. Daniel's son adored her, and she had grown deeply fond of him too. She found herself spending more weekends with them, helping with homework or baking in their kitchen. It felt strange at first being part of something so personal, but somehow it felt right. One evening, Daniel's sister, who had come to visit, pulled Clara aside. "I've never seen my brother smile this much," she said kindly. "He used to be so distant. Whatever you've brought into his life, thank you for it." Clara didn't know how to respond. She hadn't done anything special, at least not on purpose, but deep down she knew that something had changed. Not just in him, but in her too. Still, she tried to keep her feelings quiet. She reminded herself that they came from different worlds, that his life was complicated, that hers was simple. But emotions have a way of slipping through the cracks no matter how tightly you try to hold them back. A few weeks later, the foundation was invited to a national conference. Clara was asked to speak about their work and share her experience. The thought terrified her. She had never spoken in front of such a large audience. But Daniel encouraged her. "You'll be great," he told her. "Just speak from your heart. That's what people connect with." When the day came, Clara stood on stage, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at the crowd, hundreds of faces watching her, and for a moment she thought she couldn't do it. Then she saw Daniel sitting in the front row, smiling at her with quiet confidence. His son sat next to him, waving. Something inside her steadied. She began to speak, not like a professional, but like a person telling a story. She talked about fear, about courage, about how sometimes the smallest action can create the biggest change. She didn't mention her own name much. She just spoke about people, the ordinary heroes she'd met through the foundation. By the time she finished, the hall was silent. Then came the applause, yet loud and long. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She glanced toward Daniel, and in that moment, she knew she wasn't alone in this journey anymore. After the event, as they walked outside, Daniel turned to her and said softly, "You were incredible." Clara laughed nervously. "I was shaking the whole time." He smiled. "Maybe, but you still made the whole room listen." The night air was cool and the city lights shimmered around them. They walked slowly, neither wanting the moment to end. "You know," Daniel said after a while, "when I think about that day, the fire, the fear, it feels like a lifetime ago. But maybe it was the start of something neither of us expected." Clara looked at him, her heart beating a little faster. "Maybe it was," she said quietly. He didn't say anything more, but his eyes held something gentle, something unspoken, a promise maybe, or a feeling neither of them was ready to name. As they stood there under the streetlights, Clara realized that her life had taken a path she could never have imagined. What began as a single act of courage had turned into something far greater. Not just a foundation, not just a friendship, but a connection that felt like destiny slowly unfolding, one quiet moment at a time. The next morning, the sky was a pale gray, and a gentle drizzle had begun to fall. She sat by the window, a mug of warm tea in her hand, staring out at the street below. The events of the past 24 hours still felt like a dream. The smoke, the fire, the crying child, and that moment when the car exploded behind her. She had hardly slept, replaying the scene over and over again in her head. Her phone had been buzzing all morning. Unknown numbers, messages from people she didn't know, even news reporters asking for an interview. She ignored them all. She didn't rescue that child for attention or headlines. She did it because she couldn't stand there and do nothing. When she finally picked up one call, it was from a calm, polite voice. The person said they were calling on behalf of the man whose child she had saved. He wanted to meet her in person. She hesitated for a moment. She didn't want a scene or a crowd. The voice on the other end assured her it would be private. Reluctantly, she agreed. Later that afternoon, a car arrived outside her small apartment. It was sleek and black, the kind that looked out of place on her modest street. The driver stepped out and opened the door for her without saying much. She took a deep breath, climbed in, and the car pulled away silently. As they drove through the city, she felt nervous. She didn't know what to expect. The city buildings grew taller and shinier, the streets cleaner, the people more polished. It was a part of town she had never been to before. Finally, the car stopped in front of a glass building that looked like it reached the clouds. Security guards stood at the entrance, nodding as she was guided in. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, polished wood, and the faint scent of fresh flowers. The elevator ride felt endless, the numbers climbing higher until they reached the top floor. When the doors opened, she found herself in a quiet lobby with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. The man was waiting there, standing by the window, looking out at the skyline. He turned as she entered. He looked different from the day before. The grief and panic from the accident were gone, replaced by a calm, serious expression. But his eyes still carried that look, the one of someone who had come face to face with loss and refused to take life for granted again. He walked toward her and extended his hand. "Thank you," he said softly. His voice wasn't as commanding as she expected. It was warm, tired, and real. She shook his hand awkwardly. "You don't need to thank me," she said. "Anyone would have done the same." He smiled faintly. "I don't think so," he said. "I've watched the footage." People stood there, frozen. "You were the only one who ran toward the fire." She didn't know what to say. She didn't see herself as a hero. She just happened to be there. He gestured for her to sit. The room was filled with soft light, and the rain outside made the view hazy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he said, "You changed everything for me. When I saw that car burning, I thought I had lost my son. And then I saw you carrying him out." "There are no words for that," she nodded quietly. "He's okay now, right?" "Yes," he said, his face softening. "He's fine. The doctors say he'll be home soon." A long pause filled the air. She expected him to hand her a check or a gift. That's what people with power usually did. But instead he said something she didn't expect. "I don't want this moment to just end here," he said. "I've been thinking about what you did, and how unprepared most people are for emergencies like that. You saved my son because you knew what to do. I want to make sure others can do the same if it ever happens again." She looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair, his voice calm but determined. "I want to start something. A foundation, maybe. Something in your name. It'll focus on training ordinary people, teachers, drivers, parents, how to handle crises, fires, accidents, all of it. Real training for real people." She blinked in surprise. "In my name?" He nodded. "Yes, because it started with you." For a moment, she was speechless. She had never imagined something like that. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I don't need anything named after me." He smiled gently. "Maybe not, but others need what you did. You acted fast, you didn't wait for help. That's something people should learn." The rain outside grew heavier, tapping softly on the glass. She looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She liked her quiet life, the small apartment, her morning walks, her work. She didn't want to be in the spotlight, but deep down she also knew he was right. If more people knew what to do in a moment like that, lives could be saved. After a long silence, she finally said, "If it helps others, then I'm okay with it." He smiled again, this time more warmly. "Good," he said, "because it's already in motion." She looked at him, puzzled. He explained that his company's board had approved an initial fund that very morning. The foundation would be called the Collins Initiative for Emergency Response Training. There would be free workshops, first aid programs, and even scholarships for nursing students. Everything would start in her hometown, right where she lived. Her eyes widened. That's huge," she said quietly. "It's the least I can do," he replied. "You didn't just save my son. You reminded me that life isn't about money or power. It's about what we do when it matters." She sat back, overwhelmed. The words hung in the air, simple but powerful. That evening, when she returned home, her phone was full of messages again. But this time something felt different. She wasn't nervous or bothered. She just smiled quietly. News of the foundation had already reached social media. People were calling her brave, selfless, a true hero. She didn't feel like any of those things, but it was touching to see strangers showing kindness. Over the next few days, her life changed in ways she couldn't have imagined. Reporters waited outside her building. Neighbors she'd barely spoken to came by to thank her, and people across the city sent letters telling her how her story had inspired them. One evening, she was invited to a small event at a local community hall. The foundation had already begun its work, and a few families had gathered to learn basic first aid training. She watched from the back as volunteers demonstrated how to help accident victims. The atmosphere was warm and hopeful. She smiled quietly, realizing that something good had truly begun. The man arrived later that night carrying his little boy in his arms. The child ran up to her with a big grin and hugged her legs tightly. "Hi," he said cheerfully, unaware of how close he had come to tragedy. She knelt down and smiled, her eyes soft. "Hi there," she said gently. The father watched the moment, his eyes glistening. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. The gratitude was written all over his face. Weeks passed, and the story spread beyond their city. National news channels picked it up. People everywhere were moved by the courage of an ordinary woman who had risked her life for a stranger's child. More donations poured into the foundation, and soon training centers opened in nearby towns. Through it all, she remained humble. She didn't give speeches or chase fame. She quietly attended meetings, helped train others, and made sure every decision stayed true to the original purpose, to help people be ready when seconds mattered. One afternoon, months later, she found herself standing in front of a classroom full of volunteers. She was demonstrating how to pull someone from a car safely. As she spoke, she realized she was no longer nervous or shy. The fear she once carried about being seen had faded. She was doing something that mattered, something that came from her heart. When the session ended, a young woman came up to her. "You probably don't remember me," she said, "but I was there that day. I saw what you did. I froze, I couldn't move, but because of you, I joined this training. Next time I won't be afraid." Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. She smiled and nodded. "That's the whole point," she said softly. That night, as she walked home, the city lights shimmered around her. She thought about how one single moment, a car accident, a decision to run instead of stand still, had changed everything. It had connected lives that otherwise would have never crossed. She looked up at the sky, where the clouds were breaking apart and the stars were starting to show. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace. A full year had passed since that day, the day that changed everything. The city still remembered the woman who had run into the flames to save a stranger's child. But for her, life had quietly settled into a new rhythm. She didn't see herself as a celebrity or a hero. She was still the same person, living in her small apartment, walking to the same market every week, smiling at familiar faces. But inside, something had changed. That morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting soft golden light across her living room. On the table lay a neatly folded letter, an invitation to a ceremony being held at the city's main hall. The foundation that had been built in her name had reached its first anniversary. Hundreds of people had been trained. New centers had opened in 3 different cities, and countless volunteers had joined. The letter invited her to be the guest of honor. She hesitated at first. She wasn't comfortable being in the spotlight. But deep down, she knew this wasn't about her anymore. It was about what the foundation had become. It was about the lives it had touched. When the evening came, she dressed simply, a soft blue dress, her hair tied back neatly. She didn't wear much makeup. She didn't need it. Her calm smile and the kindness in her eyes spoke more than anything else could. A car from the foundation came to pick her up, just like the first time, but this time her heart wasn't filled with anxiety. There was peace instead. The city hall was glowing with warm lights. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Volunteers, families, students, even children holding small flags with the foundation symbol printed on them. There was laughter, music, and a quiet sense of pride in the air. When she stepped out of the car, people began clapping softly. It wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was warm and genuine, like a wave of appreciation that surrounded her. She smiled shyly and nodded, greeting people as she made her way inside. Inside the hall, the man was already waiting, near the stage. He looked different now, calmer, humbler. The lines on his face seemed softer. His little boy stood beside him, holding a small bouquet of white flowers. When the boy saw her, he ran toward her with open arms, giggling with excitement. She bent down and hugged him, her eyes glistening with warmth. "I missed you," the child said cheerfully. She smiled. I missed you too. The father walked over, a proud smile on his face. He's been waiting all week to see you, he said quietly. She laughed softly. He's growing fast. He talks about you all the time, the man said. He calls you his superhero. She shook her head, smiling. He's the real hero. He made it through something most people wouldn't remember, but he came out strong. Soon everyone took their seats. The hall was beautifully decorated, not with fancy banners or golden frames, but with photos of people learning first aid, community members practicing rescue drills, and volunteers helping others. Each picture told a story of compassion, courage, and kindness. When the event began, the man walked to the stage and took the microphone. His voice was calm but full of emotion. He spoke about how one person's instinct to help had changed countless lives. He talked about how in moments of chaos, one act of courage could light the way for others. Then he turned toward her, smiling. She never wanted fame. She never asked for recognition. But her actions gave us all something to believe in again, the power of humanity. The audience clapped, some wiping away tears. He then invited her to the stage. She took a deep breath and walked up slowly, her heart beating fast. She wasn't used to speaking in front of crowds. But as she looked out and saw all those faces, ordinary people who had chosen to learn, to care, to be ready, she felt her nerves melt away. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but steady. I don't know what to say except thank you, she began. I never thought that what happened that day would lead to all of this. I didn't plan to be brave. I was just scared for a little boy who needed help. But I've learned something important. Bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about doing the right thing even when you're scared. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. The hall was silent, every person listening closely. I've met so many people through this foundation, she continued. Each one of them is brave in their own way. The teachers who stay calm during emergencies, the drivers who stop to help accident victims, the students who learn first aid and pass it on, they're all heroes too. What started as one moment has turned into a movement, and that's something I'll always be grateful for. As she finished, the crowd stood and applauded. It wasn't the kind of loud applause meant to impress. It was the kind that came from the heart. The man handed her a small plaque engraved with her name, and the child handed her the white flowers with a bright smile. She bent down, hugged him again, and whispered, "You take care of yourself, okay?" He nodded, still smiling. After the ceremony, people gathered around to talk, share stories, and take photos. But she didn't stay in the center of it. She moved quietly among them, listening, laughing softly, encouraging others. She felt a deep sense of peace knowing that something so meaningful had grown from that one terrifying day. As the night went on, she found herself stepping outside for a moment of quiet. The city lights twinkled below and the air was cool and fresh. She looked up at the stars and thought about how life could change so suddenly. One minute you're driving home after work, the next you're running toward a burning car. One decision had changed not only her life but the lives of so many others. The man joined her a few minutes later, standing silently beside her. They didn't speak for a while, just watched the city together. Then he said quietly, "You know, I used to believe that people were only out for themselves, but you changed that for me." She looked at him and smiled. "Maybe we all just need a reminder sometimes," he nodded. "This foundation, it's more than I ever imagined. I just wanted to thank you again. Not just for saving my son, but for helping me see life differently." She shook her head softly. "You don't need to thank me. Just keep helping others. That's more than enough." He smiled, a deep look of respect in his eyes. "That's exactly what we'll do." They stood there for a while longer, watching the city lights flicker. Below them, people were still leaving the hall, laughing, chatting, taking pictures. Life went on, beautiful and unpredictable as ever. Weeks passed after the event, and the foundation's work kept growing. She continued to help quietly, visiting schools, small towns, and communities. She shared her story not as a tale of heroism, but as a lesson that anyone could make a difference, no matter how ordinary they thought they were. Sometimes she would visit hospitals to speak with nurses or rescue workers, reminding them how important their roles were. Other times she'd sit with children, teaching them how to stay calm during emergencies. She loved those moments most, the curiosity in their eyes, the small hands raised with eager questions. One afternoon, while she was helping train a group of volunteers, She noticed a woman standing at the back of the room, watching quietly. After the session ended, the woman approached her. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly. "A few months ago, I was in a small car accident with my daughter. Because of what I learned here, I knew what to do. She's fine now. If it weren't for this training, I might have panicked." She felt a lump form in her throat. She reached out and gently held the woman's hand. "That's why we're here," she said. "You did the right thing." Moments like that reminded her why it all mattered. Not the praise, not the name, but the quiet chain of good deeds that kept spreading. That night, she sat by her window again, watching the lights outside. The same street, the same view, but her heart was different now. She had seen how one act of kindness could ripple outward in ways she could never have imagined. Her phone buzzed with a message from the man. It was a picture. The child she'd rescued now holding up a little drawing. It was a picture of her smiling, standing beside a car and a son in the corner. Underneath, in shaky handwriting, the boy had written, "Thank you for saving my world." Tears welled in her eyes as she smiled softly at the screen. She put the phone down, looked out the window again, and whispered, "No, thank you." The stars shimmered above, and the city glowed quietly below. She thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the fire, the gratitude, and the healing that followed. It was never about being a hero. It was about being human, and in being human she had found something far greater than recognition. She had found purpose. As the night deepened, she leaned back in her chair, feeling a deep peace she hadn't known before. Somewhere out there, a child was safe. Families were learning to protect one another, and kindness was spreading, all because one ordinary woman had listened to her heart when it mattered most. And that was enough.